Welcome to This Is How, an ACLU of North Carolina podcast that unlocks the untold stories of justice, freedom, and activism from right here in North Carolina. We will explore how we can make change happen one voice at a time. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered to create a fairer future for all. And now, here's our host.
Hi everyone, I'm Calvin from the ACLU of North Carolina. My pronouns are he, him, his.
Welcome back to another episode of This Is How. Today, we will discuss how to safeguard Black and disabled students from overly broad and disproportionate disciplinary actions within the school system. But first, let's start with beyond the headlines. If you're in North Carolina, you've likely seen in the news that the ACLU of North Carolina has released a 29-page report shedding light on alarming racial disparities in school-based complaints of disorderly conduct in NC schools. ACLU report shows Black students referred to police at higher rate than white counterparts. Schools in NC's border belt refer Black students to police more often. NC students of color and students with disabilities are sent to police 2.5 times as often, ACLU says. This report paints a vivid picture of the challenges faced by Black and disabled students. Between 2017 and 2023, Black students were disciplined at an alarming 4 times the rate of their white peers, revealing a stark contrast in the treatment of youth in our educational institutions. The report, titled "The Consequences of Cops in North Carolina Schools," critically examined the adverse impact of law enforcement officers within our educational spaces. Diving into the intricacies of the state's vague disorderly conduct in schools law, we explore how it grants broad discretion to school resource officers, ultimately contributing to biased punishments. The report's recommendations advocate for a shift in priorities, from mental health funding over police presence to repealing the disorderly conduct law and ending the regular deployment of law enforcement officers in schools. The urgent call to conduct equity assessments of police impact resonates as we discuss the compelling need to invest in our children, schools, and communities, creating safe and inclusive learning environments for all. Today, we are joined by Carlton Powell, supervising attorney for the Right to Education Project from Legal Aid of North Carolina, and Michele Delgado, staff attorney for the ACLU of North Carolina. For the next few minutes, we will discuss key aspects of the report, intertwining them with excerpts from a pre-recorded conversation that features Amerie, a Black student from a North Carolina middle school, and her mother, Regina, as they recount an incident that happened at Amerie's school. Let's take a listen.
Basically, I was bullied and harassed by another student. He basically talked about me and, tried to physically fight me over my weight or how I looked in general. He would make comments about me or my body in general. So after a while, when I didn't respond, he kind of got upset about it. And there was a teacher that said that I physically touched her with my hands, or however it went, she said that I ended up touching her physically and hurting her. But when it was time to actually get the story across, she kind of said that I didn't touch her, and then she said I did. So it was like we really didn't know the situation thing, a misunderstanding with the whole situation. It was just
the teacher called the
crazy.
Resource officer for help. Then what?
When she called him for help, he came down and he aggressively told me to get out my chair and come with him. I asked him where I was going because I did not know where I was going. He aggressively told me just to get up and get my things and go wherever he wanted me to go. I asked him again where he wanted me to go. He didn't respond, but he was still aggressive and rude. So I went walking down the hallway, and my first thought was maybe he wants me to go to the office. So when I went to the office, they kind of asked why I was there. And I'm like, I was told to come down here. And they said that they knew nothing about the situation, and they didn't get a call or they didn't get anything in general noticing that I was supposed to go down there.
So, Michele and Carlton, after listening to that clip, would either or both of you be willing to discuss whether this SRO followed expected and appropriate protocol?
I would say no. And we hear the first part of Amerie's clip, and this is where she's in the classroom and the SRO's demanding that she leave the classroom. The SRO should function in 3 ways. He should be an informal counselor, an educator, and a law enforcement officer. He should be exemplifying respectful behavior. He should be trying to create a rapport with students that encourage them to want to comply with him and interact with him. And so that's not the way to do it. It's not, you don't go in the classroom and order the kid out of the chair. You can easily go into the classroom and ask the child to come with you. Explain why you're asking the child to come with you. She described him as being aggressive. What's the reason for your aggression? So I would say no. Oftentimes what we see is SROs behaving like they're on the street and that they're interacting with a threatening individual on the street, and that individual is typically an adult on the street and is threatening. Here you have a child who's in a classroom sitting in a chair. So what's threatening about that? Why do you feel the need to be aggressive? And so I think you're creating an environment where you're causing children to fear you. And when a child's afraid, they're going to react emotionally. Whereas why not try to talk to that child like a child should be talked to? And I think that includes respect, but also some understanding, compassion. And so to answer your question, I would say no, he didn't. He didn't interact with her the way he should have.
And I would have to agree with Carlton. I think part of a SRO's job is to also de-escalate by going in and being aggressive or automatically treating the child like a criminal. You're not de-escalating the situation. I believe a better approach would have been to inform the child what they have been told, ask the child from their perspective what happened. Sometimes just asking a child what is going on, how they're feeling, so that can de-escalate a situation. Sometimes children just want to be heard, and that will also will encourage them to comply. So as far as like asking the student to follow you to the office, they'll probably be more inclined to do so if they feel like you're listening to what they're saying. So there were definitely better techniques or approaches that the SRO could have taken to de-escalate that moment instead of causing fear within that child.
Yeah, thank you both so much for answering that. From what I'm understanding, like you were saying, this was not appropriate behavior, but also what I'm kind of gaining from what y'all have said is that this is not uncommon for SROs to do in terms of the way that they interact with students. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. From when I was a juvenile defender, a lot of children would mention how SROs would interact with them and their experiences with them. This is not to say all SROs act this way, but it is not an uncommon story either.
In this particular instance involving this particular SRO, Amerie says that he has not tried or attempted to develop a rapport with the students at the school. But at least in this particular instance, you have an individual who isn't, or at least according to Amerie, isn't trying and has a history of not trying, at least from Amerie's perspective, to develop this relationship, and that's vital. If you're going to have these officers in the school, they need to be there because they want to be there and because they care about children. And it seems to me, based on what Amerie says in some other cases that we have, that some SROs just don't care about children or don't love the children and don't want to be there. So you have to ask, well, why are you there in the first place?
They called him and he came down there. And the first thing I asked was for my mom to be on the phone because I felt uncomfortable from the get-go because there was more than one person in the room surrounding me. I asked them 3 times before they called my mom, but they refused to call my mom the first time I asked.
So what did you do?
I picked up my cell phone out of my pocket and I called my mom right away, and I put it on speaker so she could hear the conversation, and she put herself on mute. And as my mom was on the phone, they did not know that my mom was on the phone. So my mom was just listening to everything that was happening. And I told my mom repeatedly that I felt uncomfortable and that they basically would not put her on the phone after my first time asking for my mom to be on the phone.
After listening to this clip, what are your thoughts on Amerie being denied the choice to call her mom?
I don't quite understand why you wouldn't want a parent involved or taking part in this conversation. It doesn't really make sense to me. Amerie was 14 at the time. She's in middle school. She's scared. What is the downside of having a parent involved in that conversation? I don't think there's a logical explanation for that. So even if they were considering short-term suspending this child, she should have the right to explain her side of the story. And I don't see why she wouldn't be entitled, shouldn't be entitled to have her mom take part in her telling of that side of the story. It would just bring some clarity potentially. It's protective. And a parent, look, there's a big push out here for parents to be more involved in their children's education. So why wouldn't you want a parent to be involved? If this was involving another student in a different situation and ones I can really think of, parents will be arguing for their rights to be involved in this. I suppose they could argue they were going to let her be in on the conversation later, that maybe they wanted to, I don't know, figure out what was going on first. But I think in the end, the default should be let's have the parent be in on the conversation.
I'm going to always refer back to my theme of de-escalation, right? We're talking about students who are children, who have a lot of emotions, who are going through a lot of changes. And if a student asks for their parent to be present or called, why not? As staff, you would want to de-escalate any situation, right? That's the only way to resolve whatever issue is going on, to get answers, to get clarity about what happened. And the only way you can really do that is if all parties are calm. And so if the child is telling you that they want to speak to their parent, why not just allow that to happen? It's really concerning that you want to keep them at a state of distress and deny them the right to speak to their parent. For what reason? Like, what is the cause? So I'm always going to advocate for any action that would de-escalate a situation. And in that situation, they should have just allowed her to call her parent.
I was a teacher for 5 years in Warren County, North Carolina. I really tried to handle things myself in the classroom. And I think why I'm falling back on that, and it may be totally irrelevant, is just because I think if I were in a situation and my student is calling out to speak with her mom, it would touch me in my heart. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to put myself in that situation, and I would try to ease your concern by, letting you talk to your mom. If you're in that situation, it's almost bringing tears in my eyes. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just picturing that. Like, why would you not let a child speak to their parent when they're asking for that? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if it's so much it could be a respect issue, but one thing that I keep going back to in these kinds of cases is, do you love these children? You know? Do you feel for them? Do you care about them? And if you care about them and you love them and you feel for them, then try to ease their concern, allay their fears. And if she needs, I want my mom on this call, let her mom be on the call. So, some of it has to do with respect. Some of it has to do with like, how much are you feeling for this child right now? And I'm not trying to say that this administration doesn't, but it's something that I keep thinking about.
I feel like sometimes adults, when they're interacting with children, right, that they have this complex of like, you're a child, I'm the adult. And then especially if the adult is a person in authority, sometimes that particular adult might, I guess, they do kind of lack respect for the child because they feel like, okay, I'm in this position, I'm older than you, you have to listen to me. And in the midst of that, they're losing that mutual respect with the child. So I'm wondering was this a situation where, yes, she was asking to talk to her parent or her mother, And it was, you can do that on my time. You know, sometimes adults do that. Like, they might let you like grant your request to talk to your parent or do this and that, but their whole thing is it, you can do that when I say so. And I feel like sometimes that's just unnecessary. You're adding fuel to the flame of whatever is going on, whatever distress is going on. Yes, students are children, and you as staff are the adults, and there is some deference, of course, respect, but I believe respect is still mutual. And just because you are older to someone does not mean that you can disrespect them or basically make your authority so heavy on them that they can't get normal things like their request to call their mom granted.
Like you were saying, it's heartbreaking to hear that she was so explicit in her discomfort and her distress, and it being denied thing that would have brought her some kind of calmness, some kind of reassurance, especially in a room full of adults and not one of them being on your side. It's bothering that this was a situation that happened. I'm curious because we are talking about how this impacts students of color and students with disabilities more often than white students. In y'all's experience or opinion, would this situation have been this way if it was a white student?
The cases where we've represented children who have had these kind of impact or experiences with SROs have only involved children of color. So I can't tell you if white children are involved differently.
I mean, if we look at the numbers, Black students are referred for complaints way higher than white students. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure I can make an educated guess that white students, when they request to talk to their parent, they tend to probably get that phone call. Do I have numbers to support that? No. Is that my opinion? Absolutely. I think it's just clear looking at what the situation is in schools across the state. So, I mean, that's where that implicit bias comes in, and how people, staff treats students based on their race, whether they mean to or not. That's just the world we're in right now, unfortunately. And yes, that's my opinion.
Yeah, that implicit bias, I think, is a really important point. The statistics show that Black students are seen as aggressive almost automatically. It makes sense that students of color experience this far more often and more severity than white students.
Can I just follow up on that too?
Yeah, of course.
It's just what we do know, it kind of just to piggyback off what you're saying, is that the reason children are suspended, the number one reason children are suspended in North Carolina schools is defiant behavior or / disorderly conduct. And in most cases, that alleged conduct is being exhibited by children of color. As a matter of fact, statistically, it's factual that the highest number of kids who are suspended in North Carolina are ninth graders. And the number one reason for the suspension is defiant behavior, disorderly conduct. So we've got to ask ourselves, and those children are Black generally. So we've got to ask ourselves, like, what's going on? This is a ninth grader who's not following rules. They're in a new school. We all remember what it was like to be a ninth grader. So there's something else happening here, and it's not just, my mentor is Chris Henning, and she talks about normal adolescent behavior being the cause of some of this. And so we need to understand that this is typically children are exhibiting normal adolescent behavior, and they're being punished for it. And there are cultural reasons we need to be thinking about.
If it is normal adolescent behavior, white students are given a pass of like, oh, they're just being, they're acting their age, and Black students are seen as being aggressive and disorderly and being punished for it.
Yeah, we are characterized as being like loud, right? And maybe we are loud, but is being loud being disobedient or disorderly, or is that just us being us?
Right. In addition to that, there are studies that show that for some reason, people tend to look at Black students as older than what they are compared to white students, especially Black girls. Society tends to view them as a larger age than what they are. And I feel like that plays into how people handle those kids. They don't see them as kids anymore. They see them as young adults when they're really a child. So I believe that adds into the issue that we're addressing.
Yeah, older, larger, and more threatening. Typically, especially when the person viewing them is outside of their race. When we're looking at ourselves, we don't see ourselves as threatening. Someone outside of our race looks at us, a younger person, and looks at them as threatening. You look at Tamir Rice. Statistics back this up.
As my mom was speaking to them and asking them why was I being put in the office and why was the situation happening and why did it go on in general, she put her hands in my face, the principal, and there was other teachers, or not teachers, staff surrounding me, and they were like aggressive towards me. And they were telling me basically how my mom should have taught me better and how I'm really disrespectful and more things that would affect me. When I walked out the room, my book bag was hanging off my shoulder because, as you can tell, I was upset. My face was full of tears and I was just upset and needed a moment. So when I walked out, there was a trash can in front of me and I was not looking straight and I was not, focused on what was in front of me. I was just emotional and just ready to go home. That's what a middle schooler would feel like at the moment if it was happening to them. So I tripped over the trash can. The trash can fell forward and I kind of tried to pick up the trash if I did drop any. And they came, the staff, I believe it was the principal, and more of the staff came, rushing out of the room as if I was destroying their property. And they basically harassed me and said that I was destroying their property and that I would get a charge for what I was doing. And they just brought up how I aggressively touched the teacher and how I was getting more charges for that and how I would be sent to OCLC and get what I deserved. And I was just upset, and they called the SR,
The resource
the research officer. They called him to the room and said they needed help. As he got there, they said, put this young lady in cuffs. And I asked, why am I being put in cuffs or put in cuffs in general, because I'm just a juvenile. Like, all I wanted to do was talk to my mom in general. I didn't want to be put in cuffs. I didn't want to be slammed aggressively or any of that to even happen. He snatched my book bag off my shoulders and he told me, turn around. And I kept asking him, why am I being put in cuffs? He still gave me a response. He put me in cuffs and he slammed me down in a seat.
So there are a couple things about this clip that I want us to discuss. My first question to you both is, what are y'all's thoughts, feelings, opinions about the way that the teachers and administrators reacted when Amerie left the room and accidentally hit the trash can with her book bag?
It's upsetting. It's so frustrating. I just don't understand why these professional staff felt the need that they had to escalate this situation all the way to the point where she's being slammed into a seat and being handcuffed. How did we get there? Right? Does she have a weapon? Is she actively trying to harm someone? We're just talking about a child who is upset, who accidentally hit a trash can. It's really egregious how that entire thing panned out. And I don't understand at what point the staff feel like they're trying to de-escalate the situation. There was no actions taken by them to de-escalate. They were verbally degrading her, like, this is what you deserve. You're going to catch a charge. Things like that. What is that instilling in the child besides feeling like a criminal? Right? We're talking about a situation where there's clearly some miscommunication. Something happened where everybody's distressed. And instead of allowing her to be heard, allowing her to feel supported, you are now basically labeling her as a criminal. You're treating her as such. You're handcuffing her. You're slamming her down to the seat. What is that teaching her? What is that instilling in her? It's just really upsetting because Students are supposed to feel safe at schools. They're supposed to feel supported. Staff are supposed to be developing these young minds into active people in society. And how does that help her growth at all? So it's just really upsetting.
It is. That's what it is, upsetting. We typically, at the Right to Education Project, bring complaints against school districts and school boards. Typically what that creates is like an oppositional relationship or an adversarial relationship. And so we're on this side defending the child and they're on their side defending themselves. That's the legal fight. I say that to say, like, I understand that, especially after COVID, that things are tense in schools. And it almost feels like things are a little out of control. And I think teachers and administrators want and need help. And I believe that. And they're underfunded and under-resourced. And that's what the law has said. That's not my opinion. That's what the courts have said. So I just want to say that, and I acknowledge that. That doesn't excuse the fact that in situations like this, you don't need to put your hands in a child's face. You don't need to be telling the child your mom should have raised you better. And you certainly don't need to be calling the SRO to put this child in handcuffs. What you hear is Amerie saying her face was full of tears. She's emotional. She's crying. She admits somewhere in the interview that she was, I think, defensive and emotional. And she may have even said things that may have ruffled some feathers. She doesn't say that exactly, but you're the adult in the room. It's three of you. You need to be exemplifying behavior. It goes back to de-escalation and training is all I want to say, and culture, setting a culture. And how do we want to interact with each other? And how am I going to teach you how to interact with me? If I'm interacting this way with you, I'm teaching you how to interact with others the way I'm interacting with you, right? So this is an educational moment. What are we creating when we teach our students that this is how an adult interacts with a child? And then you ask yourself, well, why are they fighting in the schools? Or why are they fighting in the streets? Or why? Well, I get disrespected, you get this, and it's all emotion. Let's just chill out a minute. And I'm saying this from being a former teacher where a student threatened to fight me, right? So it's not like I'm coming at this from left field somewhere. But I get way too emotional talking about that. I love talking about this stuff, so I can go on forever. But yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that I'm not coming down on the administration, but I do think, and if they were honest with themselves, I bet they would step back and say, I probably could have handled that differently. I believe that. This is a hardworking principal. I believe she was principal of the year at one point. So, and she's, I think, legitimately, she's trying. But this wasn't her at her best, I don't believe. And I believe if she's honest with herself, she would say that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about the de-escalation. Because they called the SRO to de-escalate the situation that they themselves had escalated. Because like you were saying, Amerie is a child and she's going to have reactions and emotions that are difficult for her to manage because, I mean, in her position, who wouldn't, right? And so I'm wondering if you think that this situation, and when I first heard the audio, it was very like the parallels to real life police interactions. Not that school isn't real life, but like outside of school police interactions with people of color. It's a very clear parallel to me. And I'm wondering if y'all feel the same way, if you think that the schooling with the SRO is a completely different category than the way police officers interact with Black people out in the world, or if this is somehow related.
Are you asking, is there a parallel from what's being seen in school compared to what's going on in society?
Yes.
Because if
I did a really roundabout way of getting there.
Fine.
So thank you for putting that more concisely. Yes.
So I would say, yes, there's a parallel, hence the whole term school to prison pipeline, right? And so what I feel like we're seeing is that I think at some point you asked, should it be the same or like it should be similar, and it shouldn't, right? In schools, you're dealing with children who are going through changes, who are growing up, who are dealing with hormones, who's dealing with the pressures of family, life, school, just truly adjusting. So I do feel like SROs should act differently than how officers are in society. There should be a higher level of patience, a higher level of sensitivity with working with kids. If anything, my hope would be that SROs would be masters of de-escalation, right? Because a lot of childish behavior doesn't necessarily make sense, hence why we call it childish behavior. So I believe SROs should be a little bit more, have more expertise with dealing with such actions and de-escalating those situations while dealing with children's emotions. We've all interacted with kids. We understand that sometimes their reactions do not make sense, or they're overly reacting, or if you add in the student population that has disabilities, right? That's a whole nother, a whole community of kids that you got to have especially higher patience and more skillful ways of de-escalating those children and calming them down. So I think what we're seeing in schools is that SROs who do not care are acting like these are just regular Black people in the streets. And what we've seen in the streets ever since George Floyd, and before that, really, George Floyd is just when people started filming things, really. I feel like these officers come in, some of them come in and they have that same attitude that they have dealing with grown people in the streets, and now they're in schools treating the high schoolers, middle schoolers the same way. And that's not right.
I feel the same way in that there should be some distinction. This is not the street. This is a school. This is not a place where you should feel like you need to exert your authority. You should be building relationships. They undergo training, the school resource officer. It's only 40 hours, and I think it's just one training. It's not ongoing. I think that's part of the problem. But yeah, they have, and look, it's a national agency. I forget what it's called, but of the school resource officers, they have an exemplary SRO, and that SRO, as I mentioned before, is supposed to serve three functions. It's supposed to be an educator and an informal counselor. No one's expecting the officer in the street to be an informal counselor, right? Not to say that we shouldn't. I mean, but they have a tough job. But in the school system, that's what they're supposed to be. And if you're going in there with the mindset of, I'm just a law enforcement officer, and I'm just going to go in here and look for crime and arrest individuals who commit crime or worse, then you're not doing your job. And I do think that if you're going to be an SRO, you should want to be an SRO. I mean, you should want to be in school. You should want to work with kids. You should want to interact with kids. And you should be going in there every day with the mindset that I want to build relationships. And I can't say how many SROs aren't that way. And I do know, I want to say that when I was a teacher, there was an exemplary SRO in there. And I hope he hears this, because I've always wanted to commend him for the fact that he was from the community. He played basketball with us. We called him by his nickname. The kids loved him, and he loved them. And I never saw him be disrespectful. You know, these are things that that for me say, like, I use him, and I weigh every other SRO up next to him. You know, and he did not go into the classroom or the school with this mindset of I'm gonna lay down the law. You know, that's not what he's there for. He was really there to be a resource. That's in his name. This officer's laughing at Amerie. He's mocking Amerie. He's saying, "You're my prisoner now." It sounds to me like he doesn't belong there.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And Amerie or her mom mentioned that this SRO broke someone's arm prior to this, which is definitely not the way to create a mutual, respectful, beneficial relationship. And so I'm wondering if, like, y'all could also kind of expand on the way that the SRO in Amerie's experience, confronted her in terms of, like, handcuffing her, slamming her down, taking her phone, doing all of these things. What are, I know we kind of talked about how police officers are different than SROs, but this feels a lot like police officer behavior and not SRO behavior. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just kind of expand on why his confrontation of Amerie was inappropriate in this situation.
I mean, SROs are employed by the sheriff's office. They're not school employees. So if you have an SRO who goes into a situation like this and doesn't try to de-escalate it, doesn't try to build any kind of relationship, doesn't try talking to the child, it doesn't even look. Amerie says in her interview, as you point out, that or her mom does, that this SRO slammed the child down and broke his arm earlier in the school year. It's also my understanding that Amerie's never had a positive interaction with this SRO. She says he doesn't seem to be there to build relationships. It doesn't sound like he's said to her, "Good morning," or "How you doing?" or "How's school going?" or "How can I help you?" That's what he should be doing, and he doesn't do that. The interaction she does have with him is this one. Everything about it to me is inappropriate. I would say not only inappropriate, but and Michele could probably speak to this a lot better than me, but it's illegal. I would say it's excessive. I'd say it's unconstitutional. You have to consider a child's age. You have to consider whether or not this child posed any kind of threat to anyone physically. You have to consider what the offense she's alleged to have committed when you're determining how you should respond to her. You also have to consider whether or not she has a weapon or not, right? So if she's doesn't pose a threat to you and you're not accusing her of actually harming anyone, and she's not a flight risk, then what do you need to put her in handcuffs for? You know where she lives, you know who her mom is, you know where she goes to school. You have all the knowledge you need about her to write a citation if you wanted to go to court. You know what I'm saying? I mean, one thing we don't talk about enough, I think, and one of my supervisors, I was a public defender in Philadelphia, raised this to me once. He said, why do we ever need to even handcuff children? You know what I'm saying? Especially in the school context. I understand if this child has a weapon, right, or is a serious threat to safety. That's not what I'm saying. But in instances where they're not, the need for handcuffs is questionable, right, at best. Because you don't need to stop them you're not stopping them from doing anything. Generally, handcuffs are used to stop. You fear for your safety around them, or you're trying to keep them from running. You think they're going to go somewhere. Here, where's she going to go? And you're not going to lose her. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to bring a charge against her, okay, write a citation. Give a citation to her mom. You know what I'm saying? So him putting her in handcuffs, in my opinion, aside from the talking disrespectfully to her, the putting her in handcuffs to me is excessive. Now, I'm not a judge, but that's what I would argue. In a nutshell, I'd say it would be inappropriate for that reason. Now, there's a different level of, school resource officers only need reasonable suspicion to detain a person. And I suppose under the law, you might argue that this child was detained and not arrested. And you'd have to have reasonably suspect that she had committed a crime or violated a school rule to detain her. And by detain, I mean put her in a handcuff. You have a teacher say in the office that, actually, I don't know who hit me, right? Or I don't even know if I was hit. She was brushed up against. So, one, did Amerie violate a school rule or a school law or a law? It's questionable. And then the other question is even if she did, what is the need for handcuffs behind that? So I'm obviously biased, so if you ask me, I'm going to say what he did was illegal and inappropriate. But I think if we're objective, we would all agree with that.
We're talking about a trash can that fell over and words that were flying across. At what point does that bring you to the point that you have to say, I need to handcuff this child and slamming her down? It just seems all excessive to me. And it really goes back to my belief that schools really need to, not schools, but the state needs to really invest in schools, mental health and community care workers. Because at this point, this would have been a perfect moment for a crisis management team, right? Somebody who works in mental health who can come in if the principal, even the SRO calls them like, hey, can you come through and de-escalate this situation? That would be more ideal for moments like this. There's no reason why the first answer is, I need to handcuff her and let's talk about charges. Everybody talks about the school to prison pipeline and how it needs to be dismantled, but what actions are being taken to really stop that? This is a simple situation where we can cut that pipe, right? Having a tiff where something falls and people are yelling or cursing or whatever situation does not call for the child to now be entered the juvenile system. It's really excessive. It doesn't make sense. And it goes against what professionals in the education system are saying that they want changed. So I believe that school resource officers should do a better job of de-escalating, should do a better job of maybe utilizing some of the mental health providers or social workers, school counselors, whatever staff are there to help, maybe work hand in hand with them about what can be done in these situations to de-escalate. I still want to put it on the state to invest in these type of staff to work in schools. Because right now, school counselors, social workers, they're all stretched too thin. They're servicing way too many students. And that's something that we mentioned in our report. And if we did invest in those positions, then we would have a crisis management team or something that can help with students who are having these moments. And I guess my biggest thing is that if you're a school resource officer and you're going into a school and you're just, I'm gonna handcuff and charge whatever students out of line, are we treating this like a prison? Because it's giving correctional officer energy. It's not giving a school resource officer energy, right? You're supposed to go in and create those relationships with students. You're supposed to be able to talk a student down because you know them. I saw those same situations when I was growing up in school, in high school. We had a school resource officer who was wonderful because she spoke to us all the time. And even when we were dead wrong, she would come and talk to us, and we respected her enough because she always spoke to us and she knew who we were. At some point, the school had additional officers in our school who came in like a correctional officer. I myself was detained and told I will be charged with inciting a riot over a food fight on my birthday because we threw cake. So it's like, those instances shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have officers that are coming in school just to immediately want to arrest students. That's an issue.
I like that you both talked about how this is excessive reactions to Amerie, and probably several other cases are the same that you've worked with, of excessive reactions and not de-escalating and not even explaining to the child what's going on. I guess regardless if you say like, oh, we're arresting you or we're detaining you, it's still pretty traumatizing to be placed in handcuffs when you're a child, and so I think like you were saying, Carlton, it doesn't seem that it makes a lot of sense that handcuffs were even involved in this situation, much less like the aggression that was shown to Amerie after being handcuffed, and not explaining to her what was going on. And you both make really good points and explain that really, really well why this was incorrect behavior.
Can I jump in too real
Of
quick?
course.
I think there's also, and I failed to mention, there's a Fourth Circuit case on this. So this isn't just our opinion, because we're talking about the law, right? And I don't have the holding in my head like I need to, but essentially the court said it's illegal to put a young person in handcuffs when they're facing a minor allegation or accusation and they're not a flight risk and they don't pose any kind of threat to anyone's safety. And that's what happened here. This officer responded to a child knocking over a trash can. There could be other versions of this, I'm always taking the side of the student, right? And the school could say something else happened. But essentially, it was that knocking over the trash can that led to all this. And I think Amerie isn't ashamed of this. She is a student with a disability. And she'll come out and tell you. And she wants to be a teacher of students with disabilities. She wants to be a special education teacher. So I know she's not ashamed of herself for having a disability, nor should she be. So you've got an SRO who's dealing with a student with a disability and isn't thinking about that, right? So I don't know. I just wanted to add those things out there here. And I did want to add, too, that Amerie was in handcuffs for 15 to 20 minutes. The cuffs were tight. She asked the officer 4 or 5 times to loosen them. Why don't you, it almost feels like you want to hurt this child, right?
Yeah.
It almost feels like you're enjoying yourself because he's laughing. And you're my prisoner now. I have your daughter in custody, and I'm not going to loosen your cuffs. A 14-year-old.
To me, that just shows that he wants to exert his authority, right? And her and children like her are going to always remember that. And they're going to go into society, and then what? They're also going to be scared of officers because this is their experience from a young age. This officer handcuffed me and laughed and made me feel like a prisoner over what? This is what is happening. And these students grow up and be adults. And now people wonder, why are we scared of officers? Why is it such a frightening moment to be pulled over? On top of all the things we see on the news, but also these small, well, not small, but these large personal moments that happen at during your childhood. This is traumatizing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that, what you were saying, Carlton, about how it feels like he's wanting to hurt this child and he's finding enjoyment in it. On top of it, this being a really big personal moment for Amerie, that's going to follow her. And it's not something that she can just kind of shrug off, because it's scary and it hurts and it's confusing, and suddenly all of this is happening and nobody's really communicating with her, and she's being hurt and disrespected and confined. And yeah, of course that's going to impact how she feels when she grows up and gets out of school and is in the world interacting with real police officers who are behaving very similarly.
And we also can't ignore the fact that this is happening in a school, right? So then how does that impact that kid's interaction with education and schooling? That's what this is about too. What kind of environment are you creating?
So after the fact, he pulled my phone out my pocket as he seen it was ringing, and he set it on the counter of the office. And the first time my phone had rung for my mom calling me, he did not pick up. He watched it ring. And the second and third time, he picked up my cell phone. After I repeatedly asked him, why are you picking up my cell phone when it's not yours to be picking up? He picked up my cell phone. When my mom asked him questions, and he answered and said, basically, this is not your daughter. This is the SRO, and she's under my custody. And my mom asked why I was under his custody and what happened for any of this to even have gone, how far it went. And he refused to answer. He was rude to my mom. He basically was saying harsh things to me as my mom was either off the phone or on the phone. He would say harsh things like, your mom should have taught you better, and you'll be sent to OCLC and you'll get what you deserve. How you guys treated me, because I've never disrespected y'all in any kind of way. I've never been that type of kid. I've always been respectful. I've always had my manners, when it came to staff. So it upset me, honestly. I was just upset about the whole situation because it just triggered me inside because I knew I deserved better.
So I know earlier we had talked about how there's a big emphasis on parents' rights to understanding or being involved in their child's education. When the police officer answered the phone to Amerie's mom and said, your child is under my custody, What exactly is meant by that? And what are parents' rights in these kinds of situations?
I can't say what he meant. I don't know what he was thinking. Custody typically means you're arrested. I don't know if that's what he was thinking. She was charged. Those charges were dismissed, by the way. As a matter of fact, they didn't even go to court on those. They may have something to do with the teacher saying, "I don't know what happened," and there's certainly no destruction of property. But anyway, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to what was going on in that officer's mind unless he's saying she's in custody because she's under arrest. It seemed like he was goading her, though. At least the way I heard it, we through a private law firm have requested the body worn camera footage so we can have a view of what happened. But anyway, as far as the custody, why he says that, it could be because she's under arrest. As far as the parents' rights in that situation, I really can't say. I think I don't know if the parent has any special rights when a child is placed in detention that way or in custody of an officer. So I can't really speak to that.
I'll say this. When he spoke to the mother and he made a big showboat of, I have your daughter in my custody and such, how is this really adding into the whole theme that our society wants to say about it takes a village to raise a child? How are you supporting that goal when you're immediately coming off to that parent as, I have your child in my custody? Where's the conversation, right? It should have, especially with a parent who's on the phone, doesn't know what's going on. They're hearing the first thing they hear, your child's in my custody. That already puts a parent on edge. I just feel like it just would have been a little bit more appropriate to say, hey, this is Officer so-and-so. We have your daughter here. This is a situation. Maybe you want to come down, or are you able to talk? Something that just maybe allows the parent to feel like, okay, this person wants to speak to me, instead of it feeling like some type of correctional officer or parole officer answered the phone like, yeah, I have your kid. So to me, I just felt like the energy was all the way negative. I don't know what his intentions were. I don't want to speculate, but I know if I were a parent, I wouldn't have appreciated that. As far as parents' rights, I'm not quite sure, but I do know that, like, if he's making this whole show of the child's in my custody as if she's arrested, that child has a right to have her mom present for any kind of conversation that's about to happen moving forward. And again, back to my theme of de-escalation. Now you want to answer the phone call and make a show of your child is in my custody. If you were going to speak to this parent, why didn't you just allow the child to call her mom earlier? Why didn't we get the mom involved from the beginning? Right? This goes against de-escalation. If anything, it just, and as a kid hearing this, the officer talking to my mom saying she's in my custody and all this has occurred, I'm feeling scared. That's how I would feel. I would feel scared. I would feel like even the officer's talking to my mother like that. Like, what's going to happen further? Like, it just really heightens the situation. It causes even further distress. I just feel like he should have did better. In general, he should have did better. He should have knew better and did better.
The way that he phrases, like, your child's in my custody now, like, how scary that feels as a 14-year-old sitting there in handcuffs, and the resource officer is saying that you're in his custody now, and you don't know what's going on, and you can't talk to your mom. Like, that's upsetting. And like that in itself is an added trauma of just like not being able to even discuss things with your mom, and the harm that does to the mother, not knowing what's going on either. I think that, like you were saying, he could have done a much better job, and it's heartbreaking that this is how this played out. I think that it's a big thing to say that the child is in his custody, because Carlton, like you were saying, it seems like that's kind of saying that he's arresting her. And if he's not, like, what is he talking about? I think that there's just a lot went badly in this situation. And this isn't uncommon, like the ACLU report says.
And just to jump in, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a distinction between detention and arrest. And probably under the law, this doesn't qualify as an arrest. But he said what he said. And then you're asking, why did you say that? And then if she is in custody, then there's a whole different set of rights that she's entitled to. We're familiar with Miranda and these kinds of things. So like, as an officer, you need to be careful what you're saying. Are you thinking about what you're doing? Are you reacting emotionally? What is your motivation? Are you trying to scare her? Use this as as a bad example. You know what I mean? And as an educational experience for anybody who's thinking about being an SRO or for whomever, for schools. Schools don't have a say. I don't believe in who serves as an SRO in the school. It's the sheriff's office. It's the sheriff's office's decision. And that's something when we talk about solutions, maybe we should be talking about. How did he get into this position? Is he still there now?
That's an interesting question also to explore, like if schools are able to place a report to the sheriff's offices and say, he's not a good fit, it's not working out, he's already harmed one of our students, we'd like someone else. Like if that's even something that the school has a right to do is an interesting thing for us to talk about, I think. Join us next week as we continue this conversation with Carlton and Michele. We will be discussing the impact that SRO's actions have on students, as well as possible alternative solutions for a safer future. Stay tuned.
Thank you for joining This Is How, brought to you by the ACLU of North Carolina. If this episode resonates with you, we challenge you to take action. If you go to acluofnorthcarolina.org, you'll find ways to donate and volunteer. Join us on social media as well. And if you like the show, share it with your network, subscribe on YouTube or a podcast app, or give us a rating at ratethispodcast.com/ACLU-NC. This episode was edited and produced by Earfluence. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon on This Is How.